Dobro večer, hvala vam što ste došli. Ja sam Peđa iz organizacije Platforma za teoriju i praksu društvenih dobara zajedničko i večeras ćemo sa Vincentom Liegeyom pričati o autonomiji i odrastu. Mislim da imali smo i ovaj nestanak struje koji se desio pre par minuta, tako da mislim da je čak pitanje autonomije još bitnije, posebno i sa čitavom energetskom krizom koja se pomanja, koja se već dešava zapravo, i drugih stvari, kako možemo na autonomiji način da živimo. Predavanje će biti na engleskom jeziku, tako da prepuštam reč Vincentu. Nećemo imati, nažalost, simultani prevod, izvinjavam se. Posle toga ćemo, Vincent će pričati nekih 40 minuta i posle toga ćemo imati otvorenu diskusiju. I'm looking forward to you.
Thanks, Frederic. Thanks, everybody, for joining tonight. Can you hear me also in the back, or I should be louder? Is it okay? So I won't be too loud. I am usually too loud. So I'm happy to be here tonight. Thanks to the French Institute, thanks to Frederic and the organizers for organizing this conversation tonight. As Frederic said, if I understood well in Serbian, I won't be so long. I will try to make an introduction around half an hour, 40 minutes. So if you see that I start to be too long, make sign. I don't want to lose you, and I'm happy to have more like a conversation with you after. And what I will do tonight, it's just to give the three definitions what I usually give of degrowth under the question of autonomy, under the question of what we can call autonomy. So first, before starting, I will say a few words about autonomy. Autonomy is about how we can reappropriate our self-determination, how we can co-construct individually, collectively, politically, the imaginaries and the rules and the laws which make sense to have a free life. Understanding a free life is to understand also the free life of other people. So to do it in a conscious way, in an emancipated conscious way. To understand my freedom is to understand the freedom of the other one, and somehow to find the right limits to self-implement your own limits, to self-implement your own laws, which make sense to have a meaningful life on this planet, and to allow space for all the allied species all around, to allow space for everybody to also have their meaningful life on this planet. So starting from that, let me go into degrowth. Degrowth, there are usually three main definitions. The first one the story we started 20 years ago in France, when two groups of people met, and both that groups were interested in freedom, in autonomy. The first group was a group of adbusters. It was a group of people in Lyon who were making type of civil disobedience actions to criticize advertisement, marketing in our Western model of society, in our capitalist model of society, where nowadays, we are 20 years later, it's even more everywhere in our everyday life. We, unfortunately, or most of us, all have this type of machine in our pocket. We are all relying on type of social networks and type of platforms and medias, which are totally in the hands of this advertisement and marketing. And these guys wanted already to alert, before it went as far, about the danger of marketing and advertisement. In this business, which is the second international budget behind the military-industrial complex, with more than $1,000 billion invested every year by the large corporation, you will find a lot of very talented people. You will find people who have a very good understanding on how our brain is working. You will find artists who have also very good talent, intuitive talent, on how to spread messages in being very highly creative. And through this understanding, knowledge in psychology, in psychological sociology, in neuroscience, in cognitive science, and so on, they would use all this talent to hack, to rape our desire, to attract who we are to make us desire things what we don't really need. They would play with our pulsions, they would play with our fears, they would play with our intimacy, they would play with us to make us buy things what we don't really need, to attract our attention to what we won't really need. And it's interesting to remind that degrowth started with that movement, which was somehow a call for autonomy, a call for freedom, to stop with manipulation, which is everywhere. In Belgrade, it's quite impressive to see how this advertisement aggression is everywhere. This large screen everywhere, very aggressive. Also on this new big phallus, which was constructed not so far from there. I saw last night from my room the big advertisement and going up and down. It's very attractive. I mean, even if you are very critical with that, your look is attracted by that. You are attracted by that. So it was how it started around this group of people. And they met another group of people, and it's highly interesting because the second group of people was both composed of even intellectuals, academics, activists from Global South, what we call Global South, or from here you may call them more from non-aligned movements or non-aligned countries and so on. And also groups of people like me from the Western world who had the opportunity to travel to Global South, to travel to non-aligned movement countries and so on, to meet with them and to criticize, to understand what is behind development and to radically criticize development. Where development is another type of tool against autonomy. It was a slogan, it was a concept which was imposed in the international narrative after the Second World War. Maybe when Harry Truman, the President of the United States, made a speech on the state of the nation, and he started to define, to create this dichotomy, this narrative that on one hand you have developed countries, let's understand the Western world, United States, Canada, France, Germany, Western Europe and so on, and you have the underdeveloped countries, and we have the mission, and I say we, people from my countries and so on, we have the mission to develop these countries. And behind that, it's a strong narrative of post-colonial, imperialistic approach. When you start to say to the wonderful, large diversity of culture, of civilization, you will find on this planet that there is only one way to go, which is the Western way, which is the development way. And it's even more cynical that it's not only to impose the same narrative and to impose capitalism, productivism, consumerism, and so on to the rest of the world. It's actually to manipulate the people, like advertisement is doing, to make these people follow this trap in a way that they would accept it, hoping that they will also profit from the poisonous fruits of development. In accepting it, they would keep on going with this post-colonial system, where the history of development in the so-called underdeveloped countries has been to always create even more extractivism, to exploit even more the people, to steal even more resources, which could feed the consumerism, which could feed this growth model of society in the Western world. So both that group met. They met in 2002 in Paris, in UNESCO, in a large conference under the name Deconstruct or Destroy Development, Rebuild the World. When you had a lot of our friends from these non-aligned countries, from these non-aligned regions or cultures all around the world. And they understood that we are in that trap of capitalism, of growth model of society. They analyze what's happening around and they realize that if you listen to mainstream politicians all around the world, if you listen to mainstream economists, the media, already 20 years ago, most of the narratives were only about growth, GDP growth, economic growth, without understanding what do we speak about. And GDP growth is highly problematic because you would, in this very narrow economic model or indicator, you may calculate things which may be positive, which may be useful for the well-being of the population. But you would be blind on a lot of things which may be also positive. You may be blind on a lot of things which may be toxic, and you may also add in the calculation of this indicator a lot of things which may be toxic for the well-being. Like for example, I came on foot having a nice walk from the city center of Belgrade to here. I didn't have an accident, I didn't have any problem, I didn't use oil, I didn't use a car. I was quite happy. I didn't make growth. If I came by car and I had an accident and I crashed a bike, I would have made even more growth if the person was even more seriously wounded and if the car would be even more destroyed. Growth is additioning everything without calculating whether it makes sense, whether it's good, whether it's qualitative or not. And also, growth is not calculating a lot of things, and maybe the most important things for well-being. I will just take one example, care economy, which is mostly driven by women, which makes our capitalist society still more or less livable. It's all this interaction, what we would have with each other, within the family, with the friends, informal solidarities all around the society, where people are helping each other and so on. Without that, we are not human beings anymore. And growth is unable to calculate. GDP growth is not calculating this care economy. And again, it makes it invisible. It makes also, as it is driven mostly by women, all these wonderful tasks which are made by the moms and so on, invisible in our growth model of society. And more frightening, maybe less important, but more frightening for our survival on this planet, growth is unable to calculate the destruction of the ecosystem what we are relying on. We speak about the 9 planetary planets, we already overpassed at least 7. We can speak also a lot on the finite resources what our growth model of society is depending. Growth, GDP growth is not calculating where we are using that and it's not replaceable, and when it's used, it's not something what the next generation will have access for and so on. So we live in the religion of growth, which is a totally absurd economic indicator, which makes us blind and which makes us run after something which doesn't really make us happy, which doesn't really promote what is the most beautiful things in ourselves, which is alienating us to this growth model of society. And in the same time, we started to speak about environmental challenges, and our friends who were criticizing advertisement started to question, but what's happening in the mainstream marketing business? And it was the emergence of sustainable development. So it's interesting because you have the word development, what I've been criticizing for a few minutes now, and you add an adjective, beautiful adjective, sustainability, because we started to realize that development is not sustainable, so you have to add the adjective, sustainable. And the friends coming from this adbuster, this advertisement business, criticizing it and so on, they say, yeah, if I still work for a large corporation, making advertisement, what I would have do when people start to speak about green issues, I would make greenwashing. And somehow they said that we need a type of concept, of course, but mostly a word, which is not co-optable, which is not appropriatable by the dominant system. And that's how they decided to use the word décroissance in French, which was later translated by degrowth into English, I think odorast, I'm not sure about the pronunciation in Serbian, and in a lot of other languages and so on, and it's very difficult to translate it in other languages. But the main motivation was that we really need something in a society dominated by advertisement, so by lie, by manipulation, by people who keep on appropriating the concept to empty them from its content. We need a world which is not appropriatable. We need a world who has strong firewalls and protections against the risk of greenwashing. And 20 years later, let's admit that the intuition was right. Because we could have seen a lot of very good friends, a lot of great people who are very sincere, developing a lot of other type of slogan and concept in the last 20 years, which one after the other one have been systematically hacked by the dominant system. Just one example, nowadays when Skoda want to sell you a car, they don't show you what is the reality of cars. So they don't show you extractivism of lithium if it's an electric car and what does it mean, and people working on the lithium mine. They don't show you people working in the factories. They don't show you the reality of the usage of a car, which is in majority one person alone going to make a bullshit job in a traffic jam, in air pollution and this type of things. They don't show you the impact of car. I don't know the figures in Serbia, but in France it's 50,000 people who are dying earlier than they should die because of air pollution coming from the car usage and so on. And I guess in Serbia you may find this type of order of magnitude of health issues due to the usage of car. No, they will show you a nice story of a beautiful degrowth family living in autonomy, in conviviality, going on a beautiful road in the mountain rich of biodiversity with the bikes on the top of the car. The family is happy and they go to ride bike in the forest. And you can see how the dominant system, even when you culturally win on some principles or some ideas and so on, the dominant system is hacking all these cultural wins to keep on selling you exactly to the contrary, to the type of message what they try to sell. So this is the main reason why 20 years later, I still believe that degrowth is very interesting, because the world is not hackable by the dominant system. The second reason why I love this world is that it's really attacking the engine of the system. We live in a society which is around the religion of growth, because this capitalist model of society, which is about accumulating always more and more wealth and so on, is unable to survive without growth. It's really like whether you grow or you die, which is the case for a company, whether it's a corporation or a small company. It is the case for municipalities, it is the case for a state and so on. We are totally taken into this trap. And degrowth in its semantic is radically attacking and this belief and these addictions. And when I speak about belief, it's very interesting. If I just take the case of France, both the last prime minister, the actual one and the former one we have, when they made their inauguration speech in the French parliament, they both said that I don't believe in degrowth, but I believe in growth. They didn't say that, which are supposed to be the rational model of society. They didn't say that we work with our best experts in climate change, in biodiversity loss, in democracy, in economics, in well-being, in whatsoever, and we arrive to the conclusion that it's much better to try to implement green growth or whatsoever. They say that, against all what the scientists are telling us, I want to believe in growth. So the world is really attacking a type of obscurantism of the 21st century, which is a religion of growth. And last but not least, why I like degrowth. Degrowth in French, it also means to decrease, to reduce your environmental footprint. And what we have to implement right now, that a radical reduction of the environmental footprint, of the level of consumption of the richest people on this planet. First the richest countries and also the richest people in general. So degrowth is also pointing out exactly what are our main challenges. So it was the first definition of degrowth, a slogan, not appropriatable by the dominant system, attacking the religion of growth, opening a debate on the fact that a infinite growth on a finite planet is not possible, and it's maybe not desirable, and I will write to that. And also inviting the richest people who are a way of life which is unsustainable to reduce their level of consumption, to go back under level of sustainability. Starting from these words, a lot of debates were launched all around first France and after internationally, where we question the physical limits to growth, of course. I will be very quick on that, or I won't take much time to say that. I spoke about the 9 planetary limits. We can speak about peak oil, we can speak about peak everything. So now all the indicators, the environmental, physical, energetic indicators are in more than red. We are playing with our survival on this planet. And economic growth is not compatible, capitalism is not compatible with physics. So we can open the debate, but there is no debate. All the scientific literature at this stage is saying that. So I won't spend more time to deal with that. There is no like green technology, green growth, smart technology, we would say this and so on. All the academic scientific literature is showing that this is a fake news. But even worse, that even if infinite economic growth on a finite planet was possible, it's not effective toward objective of well-being, of enjoyment of life. In the 1970s, Richard Sterling, an American, or United States to be more precise, a United States economist, proved that after a certain level of GDP growth, you don't improve anymore the well-being in society, subjective well-being. You start to face other type of problems which are showing that economic growth is not only effective, but it's maybe toxic for the well-being in society. Since then, this type of studies has been made almost in all the countries in the world, and we found exactly the same result. In the beginning, when you have after a war, when you start to develop an economy or whatsoever, and you have to fulfill some basic needs for the people, you will start to create first food, settlements, school, health system, and this type of things. And in the beginning, economic growth may be correlated to improvement of well-being. But sooner or later, everywhere we could see that economic growth keeps on going, and well-being starts to slow down and even decrease. And you can find that with a lot of other type of indicator. One of the key arguments very often put in the center of the pro-growth people is life expectancy. Now, in the richest country in the world, we can see, and COVID only revealed and accelerated this phenomenon, we can see that after a certain level of GDP growth, life expectancy is not necessarily, or in most of the countries, is not improving anymore. Because you will create even more inequalities, you will create a neoliberal type of health system, you will destroy care economy, you will create even more stress, and you will mostly start to face the side effects of GDP growth on our health, with junk food, with air pollution, with lack of physical activities, and so on and so on. And it's very interesting when you speak, and it was in all the best documents like World Health Organization as well and so on, but all the best academic paper on COVID, that COVID was not an average pandemic, what we always had in history, but it was also what we can call a syndemics. A pandemic whose impact is accelerated and made even worse by civilization phenomena. The first victims of COVID were people who were already victims of our civilization, Western civilization, disease. People who have overweight, people who are with heart problem, people who have diabetes, which are the consequences of junk food, people who have immune system which are not so good, which are the consequences of our way of life, and a lot of bad quality food we may eat and so on. Also, COVID was accelerated by our way of life, where things are traveling, in particular us, all around the planet very quickly and so on. But COVID, like most of all the pandemics which started in the last decades, was the consequences of human beings attacking biodiversity. When we want to play with type of species or places where we shouldn't play. Whether it went through the Wuhan Institute, we may never know what really happened and how it developed. But what we know that it started when we start to collect this COVID disease among the bats in this old coal mine in China. And it's just one example showing that in keeping going on this direction, we are not improving the quality of life. And I may be only very quick with only two examples based on autonomy. I started with the question of development, which is a post-colonialist or slavery model, advertisement, colonizing our imaginary and hacking our desire against autonomy and so on. Degrowth question well-being from a lot of perspectives, from like question of patriarchy and ecofeminism, the question of democracy and autonomy, and I will come back on that in my conclusion, and almost everything, but I want to share with you two examples. The first one is the question of work. Work became a central value in our Western model of society. It started maybe less than 2 centuries ago. Before we were not speaking about work in the same terms as what we do right now. Now, in the 21st century, you meet somebody in a bar, you meet somebody while traveling, you meet somebody maybe here tonight, we have a drink together. The first question you may ask to the person is, what is your job? Where are you employed for? And it's interesting because in Latin languages, work is travail, which is coming from Latinum tripalium, which is a tool for torturing the people. So in a so-called civilized society, modernity, in the developed country and so on, you meet somebody in a bar, and the first question is that, what is your tripalium? And unfortunately, if there was some time where work could have been emancipatory for some people and so on, when you look at the surveys and the studies, in particular, the more rich is a country, a job is more and more a tripalium. It's more and more a time when you suffer in your everyday life. So of course, in a society organized around work, as Hannah Arendt said, there is nothing worse than a working society without a job. The first way you will suffer if you don't have a job. If you don't have a job, you're socially excluded because the social life is organized around work, but mostly you're economically excluded. In a society organized around capitalism, you simply don't survive. You don't have access for your basic needs. So you would highly suffer. You would suffer even more if you have a precarious work, where you may do things which are the most important for the society, but you have a hard, harsh working condition, low salaries, no social recognition, and so on. But even more interesting, that even if you are, like me, highly privileged, with good degree, white male from a Western world, and you get a great position in a corporation, you may suffer because you would be pushed to do things which are going around your ethics. A survey was made in France a few years ago showing that more than 50% of the French people with the highest position, so the most privileged people, are suffering more than 50% because in their everyday working life, they have to do things or impose things to the people which are going against their own values. Is it something which is really desirable? The New Economic Foundation in UK, almost 10 years ago, made an interesting study showing that the more well-paid you are, the more toxic you will be for the society. And the less well-paid you are, the more important and the more useful you will be for the society. I already spoke about care economy, so most of the most important tasks made in our society are not paid, like a woman caring about elderly people, like the grandparents, or about the children, like friendship, like to volunteer in the local football club and help young people who are from lower classes to have a good time on the weekend and so on. It's volunteer work, it's care economy, it's out of the system. But they made this study like in UK, and they took this very interesting example. Like somebody who's doing, usually it's a white male like me with good diploma, very comfortable position in the society and very protected and so on, very wealthy, who's working in the city in London and is making tax optimization. It's like to make legal something illegal, but it has a beautiful word. Will participate in avoiding participation in financing the health system of the society. So you go to get good money from rich families and they don't pay their contribution to the rest of society in paying taxes. And on the contrary of the chain, you may find maybe somebody from the region, like from Serbia, a woman, no contracts, working in a hospital in London, cleaning the hospital and so on, and will do what's the most important for our health system, which is based on hygiene. And she would have a very precarious position with very low salary. And we can see how this system is sick. It's recompensing the bad habits and not supporting what's the most important in our society. So that was my first example, but it's also about autonomy. We are not free in this working society to decide, because you start your life, even if you're highly privileged with a student loan in studying, and after you have to accept the bullshit job in a corporation all along your life. But it's even worse, and that's the history of capitalism. You've been expelled for your comments, you've been withdrawn for your know-hows, your knowledge, and so on, to go to work on machines what you don't own, and to accept to give, no, it's more like 8, 9, 10 hours of yourself, of your soul, to produce things what you don't really need. It's connected to another thought you will find in degrowth, which is a radical critics to this techno-scientist model of society, where we started to invent, implement, deploy a lot of techniques, a lot of technologies, a lot of tools, a lot of infrastructures, which were supposed to free us, to provide more autonomy, to provide more free time, to provide more freedom to reappropriate what do we do in our life and so on. And the story turned into something totally different. It's what somebody who was from a family of Croatia and was born in Vienna a bit more than 1 century ago, Ivan Illich, calls counterproductivity threshold. When you start to solve a problem from only a technical point of view, you may first implement type of technology which may be helpful. But when you start to develop these technologies, sooner or later you will reach a point where it will be counterproductive. Only one example is a car. The car is something which is a fantastic, very powerful tool with no effort. You can move yourself, you can connect with people, you can connect with other territories, you can transport a lot of goods and share things and so on. So somehow when we started to discover cars, it made sense to try to use them and to be happy with that. But we entered into a civilization of car, where it was not like the car is providing us a service when you really need this service. It's like you develop a society where you need a car for your survival, where the urbanism, the way of life, the way we produce things and transport the things are totally relying on a very strong, energy-consuming, polluting infrastructure, what we lost the control of. And now, if you see, I checked the figures, it's the same in Belgrade and in Paris. 1 car out of 3 you will see turning around, 1 out of 3 is looking for a parking place. In a range in our Western world, we spent several months of our life looking for a parking place. Is it something which is really like we wanted to work for? Average speed of a car is lower than 15 km per hour, which is less than if you go by bike. Ivan Illich pushed the provocation even further. He calculated that if you also calculate how many hours do you need to work to finance your car and the infrastructure you need to make your car go all around and so on, you will find less than 5 km per hour. So we are totally like in this trap that I need my car to go to work, to make my bullshit job which is not desirable, and I need my job to finance my car, which is totally absurd. And again, it doesn't mean that a car is something which should be out of the picture, but we have to reappropriate the knowledge. And I invite you to make this type of reflection on most of the devices that we are using on our everyday life. So some of them would have much good usage, some of them would be totally toxic and counterproductive. And the last one that we developed, it's maybe back to what I started with advertisement, is all these tools with the social networks. And I don't blame anybody, I have one in my pocket, I'm also using that. We are taken into this alienating dynamic. We started to develop wonderful social networks. First, the main goal was to connect each other, to help you connect with your children, connect with old friends from high school, what you haven't met for a long time, travel and meet people from all around the world and share ideas and create controversies and to make democracy work better and reduce hatred in our societies and so on. Less than 20 years, 15 years after this type of things very quickly and radically arrived in our life and we started to totally depend on that. it reached a point that if you live in large cities like Paris and so on, without such a machine, you're disconnected to social life. You cannot eat, you cannot travel, you cannot take the metro, you cannot find a job, you cannot meet with your friends and so on. All the social life, the economic life is organized, imposed to be organized around that. And all the last studies are showing that it desocializing the people. It helps mostly hatred ideologies. And it goes so far that it turned out that on Facebook, they lost the control of the algorithm what they developed to optimize, because the algorithm were developed not to optimize the hatred on it. They were first optimized as a business model to improve as much as possible the advertisement profits. And while going through, we ended up totally out of control of what we see. So an algorithm, which is totally heteronomous, which is a contrary to autonomy, is deciding for us what do we see, and when, and how, type of message what we see. And where it was supposed to connect each other, it will enclose the people in their own small bubbles of truth. When I publish a book, I am usually quite a lot in the media, and after I go to my Facebook, and I only see my own media appearance. It's like, it shows you what you want to see. It's totally ridiculous. And when you have an election, I may face the same here in Serbia. If I was living in Serbia, it happened to me in France or in Hungary where I live. I looked at my Facebook or my Twitter and so on. I said, but how is it possible that Macron is elected or Orban is elected? I don't see any message of anybody supporting that. And on the contrary, they will say exactly the contrary. Which totally desocializing the society, because we don't know how to handle anymore with people who don't think like us. We don't have any connection anymore. It creates a society of potentiality of killing each other because we are all enclosed in our bubble of truth and so on. And you can see the counterproductivity of heteronomy driven by the logic of profit of advertisement and the profit of the things what you buy because they are financing this advertisement. You can see that you are checking your watch. I am about to go to my last part and to conclude. So starting from that, degrowth became a movement as well, the third definition, after this great matrix of thought questioning the cultural limits to growth, why it doesn't make you autonomous, why it doesn't make you happier, and so on. We want to what to do and how to implement transitions which have to be democratic, serene, fair, desirable, toward new models of society based on new principles. And these new principles will be also, of course, autonomy, conviviality, ecofeminism, open relocalization, to relocalize but open the border, to welcome the people, help each other, create solidarity. So you produce locally what makes sense to be produced locally, to share even more. And also a lot of other type of concepts, like the low-tech, like the commons, like permaculture, agroecology, etc., etc. And then you will find 4 political levels or 4 citizen levels of degrowth. The first one is individual. How, from an individual approach, one, it's possible, because you could see in my presentation, we are not all equal to our capabilities and capacity to make a step aside, to move out of this dominant model of society and reappropriate your autonomy. When it's possible, how you can reappropriate your time, your activities, your consumptions, your feelings, your emotions, your interaction with other people. It's what we call voluntary simplicity with my co-author Anitra. We like to speak about frugal abundance, so how to move out of a society dominated by advertisement, which is creating this feeling of frustrated overconsumption. We keep on consuming more, but we are always frustrated because the more you consume, the more the advertisement will push you to consume more and desire more. On the contrary, how? And that I think the first step of autonomy. How to self-implement yourself, your own limit, reappropriate your own desire. You never live in happiness, you never live in abundance if you are unable to self-implement your own limits in everything. If not, you will always be frustrated, looking for something you would get, and when you get it, you are even more frustrated because you are looking for more. So you will find people like me who are highly privileged and who could quit their well-paid bullshit job and to implement their own way of life in dealing with other type of activities. You may find in the second level, which is a collective level. Also there you will find interesting dynamics, but not everybody can make the step aside. And the second level is a collective level around all the collective initiatives you will find all around the world. There are a lot of very interesting initiatives, which could be a community supportive agriculture, which could be urban gardening, which could be do it yourself, do it together bike shop when you repair your bike. It could be a repair cafe when you repair your devices. It could be a space for exchanging for free, like the clothes for the children, or the tools what you use not so often, and so on. So you would have a lot of fantastic things. Nothing is new. I mean, in the Western world, we have to reinvent what was everywhere in all the civilization in history, which is only good sense, but somehow I feel a bit ashamed when we are on the head page on Le Monde, because in Budapest we are producing our food and using cargo bike to distribute it, which is happening all around the world, but we are the superhero because we are well connected from the Western world. I'm self-criticizing myself. But you will find a lot of wonderful initiatives all around the world, not only in the global north, but in the global south. People who locally try to look for autonomy, reappropriate their know-hows, their tools, their knowledge, their capacity to self-produce what they really need, to rethink and reappropriate alternative economic models, which are not based on profit, but more based on sharing, on no money type of exchange system and so on. And also, people who will reappropriate a type of autonomy in the meaning of direct democracy, who will invent and experiment much more direct democratic type of governance around their production and their exchanges in their territory. So you have a wonderful set of diversity and creativity around this movement. The third one is resistance. Unfortunately, and that's why not everybody can make a step aside from an individual or collective point of view, we have to collectively resist through civil disobedience, non-violent civil disobedience actions, through demonstrations, through social movements, for much more social justice against fiscal optimization and evasion, against inequalities, against bank system out of control, against the dominance of an oligarchy on the decision of where do we put the money, for what kind of research, or against a crazy guy like Elon Musk who's now reappropriating in a very frightening way Twitter, which unfortunately has also become one of the central tools for journalists, media. How do we construct our collective imaginary? So we need to resist against that. It could also go through the participation in elections, through public talks like tonight, writing books, organizing conferences, whatsoever. I would say everything is good to connect and to fight against this pulsion of growth, which is in the hand of a minority of people, but which are much stronger than the large majority of people who are not dreaming of constructing always more useless things as we do. And the last point is the degrowth project, on which political, social, economic tools can we work to involve even more people, to reconnect people toward a new model of society. And there we open debate on unconditional basic income, how to free the people from their imposed employment and to allow them autonomy to reappropriate their activities, their know-how, their knowledge, their free time, and so on. Unconditional basic services connected to this unconditional basic income, and to provide for free. But to provide for free is not enough. Also in re-questioning what are all the basic services, the public services what we need, health, education, for example. If it's to keep on going with the same health system for free in the hand of the pharmaceutical lobbies, it doesn't really make sense. To reappropriate our health in an autonomous system, it's also to reappropriate a type of healthy food, healthy way of life with much less stress, less air pollution and so on, which will make the public service much easier to handle. The less sick you are, the less nurse you may need, and so on. The same for school. If it's to have a type of school which is only promoting a type of patriarchal, competitive model of society based on giving marks to young children to humiliate the one who don't get the good marks, to make feel dominant the one who have good marks and so on, and to have type of universities which are only educating the people or conditioning the people to be good soldiers in this productivist model of society doesn't really make sense. We have to rethink education in terms of autonomy, how everybody can be critical, how everybody could get the right emancipatory know-how, knowledge, tools to self-implement autonomy, their own limits, to self-construct a living together and so on. And with that, also how to reappropriate limits through a maximum income. I think it should be one of the most radical things to implement right now. Above a certain level of income, we say, okay, it's over. We self-implement limits towards that. One of the main arguments is the richest people are not happy. The richest people feel like totally paranoid. They cannot have any normal, human, fair human interaction with anybody because they are considered as something you have to steal the money from. So let's help them to be happy and let's liberate them for their over richness and so on. But it's not enough because as Thomas Piketty shows that nowadays inequalities are not only or not so much anymore the result of income, it's mostly coming from how much wealth you own. And then we have to open a tough debate, and history proved to us how tough it is to re-question property right and so on. So back to Proudhon, who was born in the same city than me in Besançon, property means stealing things, so historically people stole better than us and so on. But how to question it in a non-violent way? How to question inheritance? How to question how much big corporation or the richest oligarchic families own so much in a non-violent way, and we can come back on that in the conversation. I don't have a very easy tool for that, but it's one of the key debates to redistribute and to move from a private property to more common property, because autonomy is about direct democracy and how to rethink a new way to deal with the commons, to deal with the property which is neither public nor private, but around the type of governance. And I think this type of place is working based on this logic that we have a shared governance, and you open the space, you open the property, the know-how, the knowledge for the one who want to have a good usage for that, and how do we invent new type of governance around that. And of course, how to reappropriate money, which is maybe to move out of money. I think currency is maybe one of the biggest mistakes in history what we made. So how to reappropriate democratically a bank system which is out of control, which is totally financiarization and totally disconnected to any kind of real economy. How to reappropriate central bank and money creation, which is one of the biggest imposture in history. Also there, the one who became very rich are the one who usually could have a control of money creation and could get the biggest amount of debt to steal the resources and so on. So how to question that, and it can go through type of economic debt audit, like you organize a type of citizen convention to investigate this private debt, this public debt, and private debts will never be reimbursed and are much bigger than public debt, which will never be reimbursed either. So we have to erase it, but in a fair way, in a transparent way, and I think a citizen audit could be a good step. But when we speak about debt, and it's back to the beginning with radical critics to development, we also speak about the debt, what the richest people in global north have, which are all the hidden debt, which are not only the economic debt, but environmental debt, all the resources we could steal from other parts of the world and we could use for our own wealth. Also the environmental debt, like there was this study made by Jason Hickel, showing that more than 90% of climate change is in the hand of the responsibility of the Western world people, where very often we say, yes, the problem of climate change than the Chinese. No, historically, it's more than 90%. Western Europe, including Russia and so on, Japan and North America, and not the Chinese, not the Indians, even not the Africans, South Asians, or South American. More than 90% is our responsibility, and climate change is threatening the human adventure on this planet. So we should have clear statement about that, and also a type of moral depth. I mean, I spoke about patriarchy toward the women, but also towards a large part of population all around the world through colonialism, through development, and also we are in the so-called, I don't like this word, semi-peripheral countries where it's not as bad as Africa, but somehow you also face this type of situation in this region. I arrived to my conclusion. I've been much longer than what I wanted. I'm sorry for that. And Predrag has been so kind that he didn't make a bad face so much, but I hope it's okay. So I think we are in a turning point of our civilization. It's quite interesting and frightening situation in both the time. It's not the first time that the civilization is collapsing. Actually, it happens to every civilization, as it happens to any kind of alive species and any individual in any alive species. So we get birth, we die. What is quite unique, that for the first time, and it's maybe the consequences of the access to a huge concentration of energy which has been accumulated on this planet for tens and hundreds of millions of years. I speak about fossil energy. For the last 200 years, our civilization, the Western world, could impose to a large part of the society their model of development. And while burning this fossil energy, could create so much destabilization of ecosystems that it's not only threatening United States or France, and if the United States or France collapsing, it's not a big tragedy, it's part of life of civilization, but it's threatening the survival of human species on this planet, and the survival of a lot of people, actually the majority of cultures, who never wanted to follow the same way that we impose to them through development. So we are in this turning point, and a lot of indicators are telling us that we overpassed a lot of sustainable thresholds. Things are already irreversible in a lot of domains, which is highly frightening and so on. Fortunately, and it makes me full of hope, you have majorities in a lot of countries, and it's the case in France, where the last surveys are showing that it's more like a large majority of people who start to understand the challenge and who at least pretend that they would rather go to degrowth than this green growth narrative and so on. You have a lot of fantastic citizen initiatives, you have behavior change, you have interesting debates, you have most of the solutions which are there around to very easily, quickly move out of capitalism, productivism, consumerism, and to create new models of society based on all the values that I presented and so on, which makes me full of hope. Unfortunately, a minority, I can call them an oligarchy, who's totally educated and who's totally live in the religion of growth, in the religion of economics, in the religion of capitalism, who also benefits from this unfair economic model, from this extractivism and exploitation of the planet and the people all around the world, who don't understand and who don't have any interest to understand anything about what we are talking about tonight. And even if they are only a minority, their power is unbelievable. We never faced such a high level of concentration of power and inequalities in history. And these people are maybe very well represented by a crazy guy like Elon Musk, who just bought one of the main channel of communication what we have, which is also a channel of co-construction in a non-autonomous way, in a heteronomous way, of common culture, beliefs, imaginaries, and so on. It's the case for most of the mainstream media, for the social networks, for advertisement, for marketing. They also have a strong control the multinationals and the economic models with the banks and so on. They have a strong control on also weakened public institution and political democratic institution, which are on the nation states and so on. And they try to impose us a fake narrative of green growth, which is driving us always more and more to a barbarity and the collapse of our civilization. So we are at the turning point where we hope to minimize as much as possible the destruction which is imposed by this minority, and we hope that we will have some shock in our society. It's based on the logic of pedagogy of the catastrophe. I think that's our last hope, which may be strong enough to open the mindset of the people and create opportunities to radically change, but which won't be so strong that it will threat the survival of our species on this planet. So thank you for your attention, and now I am very happy to listen to your comments and your questions.
Thank you.